Here, let me put my screen down just a little bit.
Perfect. Welcome. I should probably do the same thing with mine. I am with Dr. Margaret Rutherford, and we are talking about her book that I am obsessing over, Perfectly Hidden Depression. It's amazing. It describes a syndrome, we're not arguing with the DSM because we're way too smart for that.
Well, I'm also not quite narcissistic to believe that I came up with some kind of diagnosis that nobody else had.
But you know what? I also think that we should be bolder about our accomplishments. And I think that you're amazing for this. I just wrote something this morning about how my Psychology Today blog has earned me a tremendous amount of hate mail. And most of it involves what I look like, not what I write, which
really,
yes, I'm very ugly. That's what I've been told.
You gotta be kidding me.
No, but with the C word thrown in there a lot too, which I guess makes it more powerful. But I mentioned a type of syndrome that I've watched emerge myself, and I'm calling it personality flatline, which is basically like the polarization of people. And I didn't mean it as some great, I'm discovering the earth is round, but I was met with some resistance.
What is it again? Say the term again.
Personality flatline.
Personality flatline.
Yeah. It's my goal to one day be you and sort of elaborate on that the way you did, like this.
Interesting. So you mean just someone who's as different from alexithymic, just kind of.
Yeah, sort of an extreme of one way or another. I feel like during this last year, there's been a lot of people who I thought were sane and have gone crazy in.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's often in part political, but then it expands from there. And so I've seen people change dramatically where I don't even recognize the person, both patient and friends and family. So
I'd be real interested in talking more about that. That's fascinating.
Absolutely. But for now,
this is about me.
Yeah.
And my message.
I will tell you, I have a friend from college that I recently reconnected with. We just went our separate ways, whatever.
Sure.
But I recently reconnected with her, and we were speaking last week. And we were discussing our marriages because it's not easy to be married during a pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
It's not easy.
My husband and I were talking about that last night, that they're just, there are times when we're just glad we've got 2 stories to our house because it's just really important.
Right. It's some distance and some space.
Blessed, I guess.
Right.
Very definitely blessed.
No, it's true. But and we have space because I'm home with the kids and I work from home and he goes to work. But my friend said, no one can, like, I forget what she said. I wrote it down because I thought it was brilliant, but it was basically like no one can make you feel a certain way unless you let them. And at the time I was like, that's amazing. And then when I was reading your book, I was like, that's shutting off emotions, and I went from being like, wow, she's grown so much in the 20 years to being like, no, she's this. Like, this is her. She doesn't listen to my podcast, so I can talk about it. But it's like, it's really this way of shutting off your emotions and hiding,
And the point that I want to make that's so important is that there are a lot of people who are really depressed, and they know they're depressed. They've sought treatment for depression, and by damn, they get up every morning and they put their feet on the floor and they take their meds and they exercise and they get to work and they do their job and they raise their kids, all while trying to manage depression. And my hat's off to those people. I mean, you and I both have had them as patients, and it is a tough row to hoe, as we'd say in Arkansas. And so, and yet those people are probably if you read the literature, probably more like what we'd call high functioning depression. Sure. Or smiling depression is something else that somebody's called it. And I'm really, and those people might find themselves in my book, but the people I was really most concerned about, Lindsay, and wanted to reach out to were the people that wrote to me and said, until I saw the term perfectly hidden depression, nothing really ever clicked. I wondered why I wanted to drive off the road. Sometimes I wondered why, I just wanted, I didn't know what was wrong, but there was, because I had this perfect looking life. And one woman told me, who was actually a patient of mine, she got up at like 2:30 in the morning one morning, so confused. She'd finally adopted the baby that she'd always wanted. She had a husband, she had a great job. And she thought, what is wrong? And she looked up depression, and nowhere could she find herself in those criteria.
Yeah.
And she shut I guess her laptop, and felt this intense shame, because how could she ever think that she was depressed? And she was ashamed of herself. And yet this perfectly hidden depression is because so long ago, for whatever reason, and there are many diverse reasons for creating this or having it created, being created, that you push aside these painful emotions, you push aside things that have happened to you that are hurtful, and you simply, it becomes an unconscious process. It becomes incredibly automatic. And so until you begin to piece together this gut feeling that something's wrong with this outward appearance of everything being right, that, you can begin to allow yourself, I hope people can begin to allow themselves to say, there is something wrong. It's just, I don't fit traditional criteria.
Sure. Right. Which is huge. And I was, I do not fit. I wear my heart and my crap on my sleeve. So I do not fit into this, but I am an emotional mess to anyone who I feel will listen. And as my listeners will vouch. But there was one thing in particular that really struck me. And I was seeing a patient right before this, and I did share it with her because I was curious about what her reaction was. But you talk about, you say, you can tell if you're perfectionistic or simply striving. How can you tell if you're perfectionistic or simply striving for excellence?
Yeah.
Let's say you're training for your first marathon. Do you tell yourself, I'm training for the marathon, so I will bow out as finance committee chair for now? Or do you say, I'm training for a marathon, so I'll have to get up really early on Sunday morning to get that financial report done before the meeting on Monday? I immediately, it was the latter. That's where I stand. Like,
exactly.
We don't, and when I spoke to my patient, she said the same thing. And we sort of chuckled, like, we don't know how to quit things. That's not something we do. And, that's, how are we supposed to do that? But you're right. One allows you some care and comfort for your limits as a person, and the other is just a total denial of having any limits or of needing to set boundaries,
Right.
or being able to.
Exactly. And, I can remember that some shocked look of when I would say, well, so what are you going to take off your plate? And someone like this would look at me, what are you talking about? I'll just get a bigger plate. And yeah, or get two. In fact, I put this quote in the box. It's a true quote from a patient of mine who said, because I put it in this form or this visualization of you put those kinds of painful memories and experiences in a box, and you put that box away.
Sure.
Sort of stuffed in that emotional closet, or however we want to talk about it. And she said, frankly, I just build a bigger box. And it's that same kind of feeling that I'm not, it is so ingrained in me that this is not what I do, that I do. In fact, I don't even know how to connect.
Sure.
Many people don't. I don't even know how to begin to connect safely with any of that. So it just gets pushed away and pushed away. There's a woman on ABC, Dr. Jen Ashton, who is their medical. I've seen so much of her in the last year because, of course, COVID. But right before COVID struck, or we became aware of COVID, her ex-husband of only about 2 weeks or a month or something, they had not gotten divorced. They had not been divorced for long. And she got on ABC News and she was talking about suicide, his suicide. And she said, wow, he didn't fit any of the criteria. And I've been trying to reach out to her. If you know Dr. Jen Ashton, tell her to call Dr. Margaret Rutherford, because I bet that he fit into this category.
Right.
And Lindsay, what I'm really scared of is that if mental health professionals don't know about it, that we'll all get out our little list of 9 or 10 symptoms that must be present, or especially the first two. And then we'll say, well, you don't fit this. So, I just think you're tired. And tragically, and this is not the first time I've heard this, but gosh, I had these women reach out to me in May. In fact, on February the 14th last year, one of their friends hung herself. Trigger warning for anybody here. Hung herself. And she had my book on her nightstand.
Wow.
And she had this exquisite looking life. And they were all shocked. They both read the book. They connected with me. And, when I first heard that, I can talk about it now, but when they first called me and we talked or whatever, Zooming, I think, I've got tears in my eyes because those are exactly the people. And with your help, and I'm so appreciative, maybe we can reach a few more.
100%, and I think you're right. But you are making a difference. I mean, you've already made a difference in the way I handle patients. In that
Thank you so much.
I did when I was speaking with a patient yesterday, maybe the day before. Time has lost meaning. But I did say, like, are you? It was a relatively new patient, and I said, "Are you? Or do you ever feel like sometimes you want to hurt or kill yourself?" And they said no. And then I did go one step further, as you spoke about in your book, and say, if you did, would you let me know?
Right. Oh, thank you.
I know.
Oh my God. I got goosebumps when you said that.
No, you've made a difference. It is going to be something I ask. It is going to be the way, especially because I do get a lot of suicidal patients, and I do often ask, and I don't flip out and send them to the emergency room if the answer is yes. And so I understand there's a lot of gray area, but it never occurred to me to ask, would you tell me if you had? And that's a really different way of looking at it, because it gives some people are still going to lie and keep that defense up, but it gives another opportunity for them to say no.
Right. And then it opens up a vista of other kinds of responses from you, like, well, tell me where you learned that wasn't okay.
Right.
Tell me more about why you would not reveal that. Is it shame? Is it religious things? Is it, what is it? Is it, you're afraid you'd be looked down upon? Just what is it? Or you just don't know how. It could be all kinds of things. So, I have a podcast, and I'm always, people have written, reviews and things, and I'm always pleased when someone says, I went to therapy because of
That's fantastic.
of your podcast. And you saying that just means so much to me, because I am trying to reach other mental health professionals. I did struggle, Lindsay, with the idea of, I'm not a researcher. I'm a clinician. I've been a clinician. I never wanted to write a book. And all of a sudden, this book kind of found me. This topic found me.
Sure, it has to be said. It's a story that has to be told.
Yeah, and so, but it has been challenging in my own mind to think I am confronting our profession somewhat and saying there's this overlooked presentation of depression that we are giving short shrift. We're telling patients they're tired. We're telling patients that they just worry too much. We say, take a vacation. And we're not asking the question that you did, which is, well, tell me more about, how you would, whether you would talk about it, or you ask a much more simple question that's in my mind.
But our profession was built on confrontation.
That's right.
So I don't think I did my like a postdoc analytic training. And so I'm
Oh, fascinating.
and so in theory, I should be a lot more blank slatey than I am, but it just wasn't me. So
No, it's not me either.
but
No, no,
it
no,
was
no, no.
built on confrontation. It was built on change. It was built on,
Mhm.
and I don't know why. I think you should feel a little bit more empowerment about
I
being a
do
physician.
now.
Oh,
I
good.
do now. It was when I was starting out. It was this kind of reticence, and yet the more I wrote and the more I thought and the more I talked and the more in fact, I had an author as a patient at the time. And she was kind enough occasionally at the end of the session to say, how's your writing going? And I wouldn't say much, fine or whatever. But one day I just said, well, I'm struggling a little because I'm, unclear about my own voice. And,
Right.
And she looked at me and what she said was, whatever you have to say, they've never heard it from you.
Nice.
That's all it was. And I thought, oh, okay. And so that really cleared that up for me. And you're right. I have been doing this a long time, and I almost lost a patient at the very beginning of the book.
Yes.
Literally, and it was kind of this. I don't know. It sounded like something would happen in a soap opera, but it was true. And I've never done anything like that. But I went to a patient's home because her significant other had let me know that there was a problem. I changed some of the details and I can't quite remember what I wrote. So I'm not going to say any more about the details, but I did find her trying to die by suicide. She had taken a bunch of pills and alcohol. And yet I had not diagnosed her with depression. I had no idea she was suicidal.
By the way, I will, hopefully you have not gotten a lot of pushback, if any, but I could read the tentativeness in your words of like, listen, I know I'm doing something we don't do.
My best friend had me put that in there. She said, Margaret, you're going to get crucified for this.
Not by me. Listen, I don't know. I know you said Arkansas, but no, but like I feel, so I'm in Long Island and like, I like to say that I'm in a small town because it's small enough that everyone is up. It's very homogeneous. Where too homogeneous, and everyone is up in each other's business all the time. And so I am clear with patients about any connections I might have.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have patients who go to the same school as my
Sure, of course.
one or both of my children. Or I even ended up on like a committee meeting with one of my and one of my it happens, and it was comical, and it was but I don't, of course we're raised to believe there's this bubble of perfection in which we have to live, and and I think that keeps us. I would absolutely have gone to my patient's house. Like,
well, again, and I was tentative about it. Sometimes I think I went a little overboard with that, but
she's alive.
And and I I contacted her and said, I want to use this at the opening of the book. And she said, of course, and so, but I didn't know if she told anyone and that kind of thing. So I wanted to make sure she was okay with it. But, it was, I wish I could say, oh, all kind of light bulbs went on then. And I decided to write this book then. Well, that was 20 years ago. So no, 15 years ago. So no, that didn't, but I did begin to question my own reasoning and at that time I probably caught more of these people than I would have if I had never seen her.
Sure.
And had that experience with her. So I thought it was an important way to open the book and a very dramatic thing. I knew this would happen. There are things I've learned since I wrote the book about and figured out some more things. I have some things I wish I'd put in it. But I don't know if it nearly killed me to write the book. So I don't know if I'll write another one. But
I loved when your dedication is to your husband at the beginning of the book. And it says, now it's my turn to do the laundry and
do the dishes. I'll do the laundry. Dishes. That's right. No, it is the laundry. You're right.
Okay.
It's my turn to do the laundry.
I was like, that is totally what happens when you're writing a book, because you get, it's what happens to me with everything. I'm a bit obsessive compulsive. So I just get sucked into these things. But I laughed out loud. I was like, okay, this is going to go well, because it's a great, dedication based on how it just sucks you in. And then of course, yes, if I ever, I'm going to write a book. That's what I'm going to do. But my husband will definitely possibly divorce me.
Oh, and he was such a part of it. I mean, he didn't really ask too many questions about the book. I finally egged him into reading it just so he would, if someone asked him about it, he'd go, oh, yeah, I read it. But I mean, I could not have done it without him. He took over everything except the cooking. And that's the way he really helped. And I was seeing a full complement of patients. I was still seeing 30 patients a week and writing the book. And, I am a workaholic myself. People ask me, well, have you had this? And I have panic attacks and panic disorder. That's always been my struggle in life. And, at least mentally, I've been plenty more.
Right.
Yeah, so I've never been, but my mother was definitely, I watched her live this out, and she actually became addicted to prescription drugs, and it ruined her life. And at the end of the book, I did say to her, or she said to me at the end of her life, she would be horrified to know that I wrote a book and included her in it in any way. But she said, if I had known what I was doing to myself, I wouldn't have done it. And I think that probably there are a lot of people out there like my mom that are hiding how bad they feel.
Yeah.
And they either drink or they take benzos or they're workaholics, or, they have these defense mechanisms against it, and they find other people like them, like we all do. We all want to be with people who are kind of like us.
Sure. I spent years trying to convince people that my mother had a problem because it didn't look like it from the outside. So I definitely hear it. And now the problem is so far-fetched that it's just not, it's unlikely to be resolved. But so I definitely related to that. And I who knows how it started, but it's at the farthest end of this. Well, that's not true. She can always push it farther. But so I definitely hear you, and it's something that's really difficult. And, you mentioned in the book, this one patient who you called her Jackie, who left when things started getting, when things started getting dug up. And so,
yes.
It is those patients, I think, that stick with us.
Sure.
And probably in part because of mother issues, but also just in part because of, when you start doing good work and someone bails, it's not like good work as in I need a pat on the shoulder. It's good work as in, oh, I think I've found a way to crack this shell.
And, I know that with this particular genre of problem or syndrome, as I call it, there are a lot of hurdles that are very specific to that. We all have hurdles I remember walking out of a therapy session one time when a therapist suggested that my mother might be manipulative, and I didn't want to go there. I got up and left. I said, obviously I can't work with you. And I called her back the next day, and I said, I think maybe we touched a nerve. I think perhaps we need to continue.
Had you already gone to graduate school? Were you already in the field?
No. I was actually a professional singer in my 20s. I was a jingle singer in Dallas.
Interesting.
And sang TV and radio commercials. And then I had, I tried rock and roll, and I was awful. All I did was jump up and down and have big hair. And, it was terrible.
That's what you're supposed to do in your 20s.
But I was terrible. And so I tried my hand at just some simple jazz standard kind of thing. And I was much better at that. So I actually made more of a living doing that. But I got thrown out of a couple of rock and roll bands because I was so bad. But anyway, I did that. And then, but I loved singing, and I've done some performing and love that. But I didn't like the lifestyle, and the lifestyle was actually changing me into somebody that I did not like. And I recognized that, thank God. And this guy named Ivan was he was a bass player. Ivan, the bass player, I wonder where he is now. And he was talking to me about this thing called music therapy. And I'd been volunteering at the Dallas Battered Women's Shelter and loving it. And so I thought, well, maybe I would enjoy that, because I was not a psych major in college. So I went over to SMU. I plopped down all the money I had in the world for my first year. And this was back in 1984. And so sure enough, they let me in and I was doing my music therapy degree, gradually getting out of the business. And I did my last rotation at a psych hospital. And of course, I had been in therapy. And then I did this rotation and I saw what psychologists did with these patients. And that's what I want to do. So it took me a whole nother year. I had to go back, take psych courses. And actually, a secretary about 2 years into the program, I got into the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. And she, the psychiatry department had a psychology division. And she said, the secretary pulled me aside like my third year. And she said, you want to know a little secret about you? And I said, I guess. Really? Do I? And she said, you were let in as a curiosity. And I said, what do you mean I was as a curiosity? She said, we've never had anybody like you apply to this program. So anyway, I guess I did okay. So,
well, it's okay. I only became a psych major because this man told me not to. So.
There you go.
Yeah. And it was a definite up and down look, and then just minor, and you'll never do anything with that. So my favorite story to tell.
There you go. Well, you showed him you've got a book and a podcast and a whole practice. And in New York, I'm sure that's not too easy. I'm sure there's a lot of competition there too.
It is. There are a lot of us, but this.
I will say though, if the pandemic has made balancing this all a bit easier, which is also it has also meant, I should say, I've made it harder for myself by picking up more side hustles to do along the way.
There you go.
That's what we do.
Should I send you a bigger plate?
Probably. It's true. My husband said to me, I was approached about doing something else. And I was like, I'm thinking about, and he said, okay, what are you going to give up? And I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training recently. And so it's like always been my dream, but so when I did it, he goes,
for you though.
So what are you going to give up? I was like, I'm not. And so like my scheduling book probably causes the majority of our fights because, we've got a 10 and a 12-year-old at home. And although they're right here, and it'll be a miracle if we make this through without my son calling out that he loves me. Because anytime he's like in or out, he'll just,
Well, that's all right. I'd prefer hearing that too.
I know, right?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, my daughter
comes out of a 10-year-old mouth now.
But it's tough juggling it all. And when I was reading the book, I was like, the difference is I have been airing my emotional baggage for years, In fact, the reason I asked you if you were in graduate school when you had this exchange with this therapist is because it's a huge amount of insight. My first year of graduate school, I went to a therapist and it became highly recommended. And I felt like every time I said certain things, she cringed. I really didn't like her, but we're taught, don't be resistant. Don't be resistant. It's like this bad word, that you have to, any feelings that come up are like, no, you fight through that. And then on our third session, she was wearing a turtleneck inside out and backwards. And I was like, fuck this shit. Like, no, like you can't get dressed. You can't handle that. But I've gotten older and learned to go with my gut on a therapist.
I have to tell you my funniest ever experience with a therapist. I was seeing a psychiatrist for my anxiety. I was not in graduate school. Oh, but I was in graduate school at the time. I was. And so I sat in his office and his wife was his receptionist. And this was in Texas, in Dallas. And she was pure late 80s Texan. I mean, she had the black curly hair and the shoulder pads and too much perfume and jangly bracelets and nicest lady you'd ever meet. Can't remember her name. And one day I was sitting out there and there was never anybody in the waiting room. And so, because he wasn't very good actually. So I found out later. But anyway, she came out and let's call her Suzanne. I don't know. Suzanne sat down by me and her perfume wafted over me. And she said, can I ask you something? And I said, well, of course. And she goes, what exactly is wrong with you? She said, you seem so normal. I said, well, I have panic disorder. Well, don't tell Raymond. I asked you, he'd kill me.
Of course you would. That's very funny.
Oh, I love that story.
It's very 80s also. It's like
Yes, it's very
involvement
80s.
of mental health. It's funny. I had no problem swallowing your syndrome because I hate having to find a diagnosis for a person. Like I mean, I do it because I have some insurance patients, but otherwise I try not to,
Yeah.
because
Pigeonhole people. Mhm.
right, because then, but not because I'm such a lofty, superior person, but because I'm worried that I'll miss something by getting distracted,
And getting your own thinking down a certain path and not keeping it open to other things. I will say that I don't know if some of your listeners may be, very well educated about psychology. Many of mine are not. And certainly I wasn't for much of my life. And just to say, what is a syndrome? I mean, probably the most known syndrome is something called codependence, which, years and years ago in somebody's living room, a bunch of partners of alcoholics got together and said, well, what do we have in common? And they began, formulating this syndrome of codependence. And that's how codependence got started. And now it's like, oh, I'm so codependent, but we didn't have a name for that syndrome before those people began meeting and trying to figure out why they were staying in the lives of alcoholics and what they were doing. And the book Codependent No More has a great description of that. And I used it in the book. So, and I do want to say that the book, we didn't call it a workbook. The publishing company I used actually has this whole series of workbooks that kind of follow you a formula.
Okay.
And I didn't really want to follow that formula. So they said, well, then you can't call it a workbook. I said, fine. And anyway, but there are 60 exercises. And the interesting thing about it, remember, people who identify with perfectly hidden depression are also people who like to stay very much in their head. They really, the emotional thing is really difficult, except when it's empathizing with other people's emotions. It can be there for other people all the time, but not necessarily reveal themselves hardly ever. And I've had so many people, which is very nice, tell me, oh, I read your book. I really enjoyed it. And I said, good. So what did you think about the exercises? Oh, I didn't do those. And I said, well, why not? And she said, because I tried a couple and it just made me too uncomfortable.
I mean,
and
that's
so
entirely the point, though.
Yes, exactly. In fact, one of my criticisms on Goodreads is that I loved the book when I first started it. The first 3 chapters felt like they were talking to me. And then it started kind of feeling like a therapy session. And I thought,
I'm a
exactly.
No, we did my book was it's similarly in terms of giving people active exercises to do. And I think that there's a certain amount of people that will want that and a certain who will not. But I loved, the first one, I believe, the first 2, the first one was, create a mantra of confronting shame and perfectionism. I thought that was fantastic. And then the second one was identify my shame and give it a name. And you said something that now that I know your personality, I totally see it. You said, you might even like to give that gremlin's voice a name, such as Shirley or Bob. It can add a little humor when you hear Bob's voice in your head.
Right.
And humor is less scary.
And I also got that from a guy named Reed Wilson, who has been writing about anxiety for years. And that's what he asks people to do, because it also, yes, it adds humor. I have a patient calls his Gladys. I love that name, but I don't. I think it's funny. But anyway, apologies to all the Gladyses out there. But the reason why I think it's important to do that with anxiety, even some kinds of depression sometimes, is that you can say, I'm getting anxious. I am getting out of control, rather than saying, oh, Bob's coming to visit. And, he's unexpected. He's not particularly welcome, but if I can sort of see it as something happening to me, rather than me causing it to happen, I get a little bit of distance, just enough to say, okay, well, then I need to really get focused on what's in front of me. I need to breathe. Bob makes my legs shake, which is my first sign that I'm panicked.
Sure.
Or getting panicked. And if I can just breathe and stay externally focused, then maybe I can breathe Bob away and say, I'll see you next time because I know you'll be back.
Right.
But it adds just this little bit of, you're not me. I have anxiety. I am not anxiety.
Sure.
My name is not Anxiety Rutherford. It's Margaret Rutherford. And then Bob comes to visit. So it has really helped me and helped some other people that I can see. Yeah.
I do with my, I also have suffered from anxiety. I stole something from the addiction literature, which is HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So when my patients start feeling this, sometimes I ask them to run down the list of, am I hungry? Like, when was the last time I ate? Have I had enough water? Is this a physical symptom masquerading?
Yeah, sure.
Or anger, is it misdirected emotion at someone else and I'm turning it on myself?
Mm-hmm.
Loneliness is sort of similar. And then, tired, it's true. I think our body tricks us when we're not.
Sure.
When we don't know what's going on, or when we don't get enough sleep and we don't take enough care of ourselves. So I think anything that can distance yourself is helpful.
Right.
And I don't know why someone wouldn't do the exercises. I mean,
because they need to do them perfectly.
Right.
Even the first one, I had a patient come in and she said, I'm reading your book, but I'm stuck. And I said, where are you stuck? With the first exercise. I said, okay. So she'd say, because, you're supposed to come up with this mantra that will help you at least kind of sit with this and manage it and cope with whatever comes up. Like mine might be, I've got to start where I am, something like that. And she said, so I said, okay, so here's your mantra. Try this on for size. What would it be like for right now if your mantra is, my mantra is, I want to get unstuck from thinking I need the perfect mantra.
It's a good one.
And you just start where you are.
Yeah.
You just start where you are. And rather than saying, so anyway, that's, she learned something. And I'm talking to New Harbinger right now. I may get a big fat no, but I'm talking to New Harbinger about going on and doing an addendum workbook.
Wow, that'd be great.
That would explain more a little bit. I mean, I had 210 pages to cram in a whole bunch of information. So I'm thinking about doing a workbook and maybe having even part of that for therapists.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Or
I
maybe
think that would be great. People love, obviously, we love something to hold on to, but it's true.
I'm a very, I wouldn't call me solution oriented, but I'm a very action oriented kind of therapist. I'm always asking people, what can we do about it? What do you have control over? What do you actually have control over? And let's focus on that. And so, that's what I wanted the book to reflect too.
This is sort of a weird time where I feel like no one feels like they have control over anything. So.
Yeah, but they do.
Yes, they do.
I mean, I had control over what color Post-it note I wanted to use this morning. Is that stupid? Yeah. Maybe in times when it didn't matter, but I happen to like this color and anyway, that being silly, but
but it's true. We're not giving, it's too easy to feel. I mean, I personally definitely feel like overwhelmed, and there was a while where I was grasping onto the numbers and the percent positive and anything to just, find some way. And the truth is that, the future is only so predictable. And the one thing that it seems absolutely for sure is the unpredictability of it now.
Exactly. And I'm certainly not unaware that many people are facing, losing their homes and lost jobs and guffawing at the idea that you'd find more control over the color of a Post-it note. I mean, they're just worried about feeding their kids. So I'm not being disrespectful to those folks. But
I don't think you are. I think it's a matter of saying, start where you are again.
Well, I volunteer at the Free Health Center around here. And even with those folks, that's what we focus on. I focus on. So, Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's start where you are. So how do you, I guess, where do you start with someone who can't, who feels like because they can't do it perfectly? How do they start? I mean, you start where they are, obviously, as you said. But is there, I guess I'm wondering if past those first few steps, is there another sticking point that people tend to get?
Well, I think, and there are 5 chapters in the book that are delineated as the treatment part of the book. The part that the girl didn't like when she said, "Well, that feels like a therapy session."
Right.
So
that's why we're not supposed to read our comments.
Yeah, well, I it really didn't bother me. I got a big chuckle out of it. Perfectionism is often not seen as a problem, and there's a certain kind of perfectionism called constructive perfectionism that is not. It's about learning and enjoying learning and being curious and working really hard and having goals and being excited about meeting them. But you can accept making mistakes. You can accept failure, and there's fulfillment in that process. There's true joy and fulfillment in constructive perfectionism. Destructive perfectionism is not fulfilling. Once you finish one kind of goal, you're on to the very next one. In fact, you're probably already thinking about the next goal as you finish up the first one. So there's no sense of being in the present, and kind of, there's a term called, when academic researchers look at the different kinds of perfectionism and the effect they have on people, there are 3 types. There's self-oriented, where you expect perfection from yourself. Then there's other-oriented, meaning you want everybody else around you to be perfect, and that's not exactly a great character trait. And then 3 is socially prescribed perfectionism, meaning that you're constantly trying to not only meet, but exceed the expectations of other people. And you have no control over that. So it's like being on a treadmill where you can't stop it.
Sure.
So and the more you do, the more you're expected to do. This is the person that's the head of the community blood drive or raising money for your heart association. And as soon as it's over and they've raised $100,000, someone comes up to them and goes, "We can't wait to have you do it next year and make more money." And so there's this, "Oh yeah, I got to raise my hand. I got to do it again." So it's a real, it's a catch-22. And the socially prescribed perfectionism is actually the most deadly kind of perfectionism. It can lead to more suicides, as well as it's just it's definitely the most dangerous kind. Self-oriented is next, and then other-oriented is followed.
Gotcha. And let me ask you, because you made me think, are certain perfections more likely to have people with perfectly hidden depression in them? Because
I didn't quite understand one word you said at the very beginning. I'm sorry, what?
Professions.
That's one of the things I wish I'd put in the book. I had an extremely interesting interview last week with a man. I actually discovered him on Twitter. His book is not a New York Times bestseller, but I think he's fascinating. He's a doctor in Indiana, and he, in fact, he trained as a pediatric oncologist at some very fine institutions and was on all this. He was well known nationally, if not beginning to be well known internationally. His name is Adam Hill. And he was an alcoholic, a terrible alcoholic. And he had terrible depression, and he was treating the depression with the alcohol. And he came forward, and he and I talked some because he was aware of my book as well. And he and I talked some about these professions,
right?
That first responders, doctors, therapists, anybody who says, you have to sign some form for your licensure to be renewed, that you have, you don't have a mental illness, and you're not, you've not or disorder with substances, and it will not impede your practice. And so, and he had several physicians say, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And his profession, he did suffer. His career did suffer for a few years until finally he began being seen as this advocate for mental health treatment and openness about mental health issues. So yes, there are some definite, and also something I've talked more about with the book, especially with Black Lives Matter. And I have several African American patients, some of whom came in because of my book, and they have said, Margaret, if we hadn't been perfect looking, we would never have gotten the chance that
Absolutely.
the white kids got. We just would not have gotten the chance. And we still feel that way, that we have to outperform and out exceed and over exceed, whatever that word would be. And I wish I had I'm going to be looking more into that. I really want to learn more about that kind of response.
I've not heard that. I've certainly heard that from minority patients as well. And it's not, it's sad and not surprising. And I say sad because it's a structural, institutional, obviously, issue.
Right.
It's, we do need to talk more in the mental health field about the underserved, populations. I mean, I have someone that I've met through Instagram. He's a comedian. His name is Von Michael, and he has a podcast as well. And when I told him that, African American men are the least likely to seek treatment, and the most likely, I don't know if this is still true, but one of the most likely to successfully suicide be, they've got a high rate of suicide as well. And
that's right.
He's African American, and he was very intrigued by that, and so he and I are going to be talking at some point in the
Good.
because there is something to be said about raising awareness in our field of the populations that don't get served, and they don't get served in part because they don't see people who look like themselves in the field.
Mm-hmm.
My town has that problem with minorities and teachers. We don't have many minority teachers, particularly in the high school. And when I say many, I would not be surprised if in some that was any,
I've been delighted that Northwest Arkansas is not we actually have a very large Hispanic community, but not many Black Americans, but it's growing. And so I'm delighted to see some younger therapists coming in that are much more diverse than when I first moved here.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is in certain ways, listen, in certain ways, this is a field that is limited by financial, you have to be willing to not get paid or to be able to survive on minimum salary for, 5 years, of your doctorate. And so that is limiting. And then the first job I had when I graduated was part-time at a, residential treatment facility, inpatient. And there were no benefits because they hit it just below that mark. So who can afford to do that besides largely a woman who has her benefits from somewhere else, or a man perhaps, but there are many limiting things about our field that do need to change in order for.
Well, I think that's why people are going more the LBC route or something else, rather than getting a doctorate. So, more power to them.
Right. And also, I'm not sure if I didn't get a doctorate because I wanted to be called doctor like my dad, and that's got its own issues. So Margaret, where can we find your book?
It's really everywhere. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's not going to be on your local bookstore shelf. It's doing well, actually, for the fact that I'm not in Los Angeles or New York. I'm in the middle of Arkansas, and so I think I'm glad. In fact, I just found out last week it's in its second printing, so that's good.
Fantastic.
And so, but it's go to your local bookstore and ask for it because that would be good for them. It's an ebook, it's an audiobook. So you can check that out at Amazon or audible.com. And actually you can reach out to New Harbinger, who publicized or publicated. Oh my Lord, I need some more tea. Published it. Publicated should be a word, I think.
It should, and I will go along with it. And
there you go. There you go.
And then
Yeah, the podcast is called the Self Work Podcast with moi, with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. It also is everywhere: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, everywhere you listen. And I'm really honored by it because I being a jingle singer, it was kind of fun getting in front of a microphone again when I did this 4 years ago, and I never thought it would do as well as it has. And we reached 2 million downloads in December. So yeah, it was really great. So I have a great team that helps me. To tell you a little bit about the podcast, I simply talk about, usually it's just me, but I use a lot of research and the work of other people, and I bring it in, and then I add my 2 cents to it. Then I have a listener email that I read and ask but I have started doing some interviews, I enjoy those as well. So occasionally I'll have an interview.
I think I definitely enjoy my podcast more during quarantine than I ever thought I would, because it's so nice to connect to people. But I'm very excited. I definitely am going to check out the podcast, and I encourage our listeners to do the same.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Oh, Lindsay, I so appreciate it. Some of the podcast I did at first,